The Privy Council, indeed, was unanimously of opinion that peace was the first need of France. The condition, however, of having to give up by the occupation of Besançon and our principal fortresses the key of our frontiers caused some to hesitate. Amongst those who were consulted, I may mention Monsieur de Sessac and General Dejean, first inspector of engineers, as having shown the most firmness on this solemn occasion. General Dejean was a noble character, and it is known with what generous indignation he combated in 1815 resolutions tending to submit to laws imposed by the foreigners. Napoleon had had occasion in 1810 to give this general publicly a high proof of his esteem. On March 9th, King Joseph congratulated the emperor on the victory at Craonne and pressed him in a most eloquent manner to take advantage of the success and to conclude peace. But the victory of Craonne was balanced by the issue of the Battle of Laon, in which the emperor had to fight against an army which was 5 times stronger than his own. Napoleon was forced to retreat to avoid being surrounded by forces so vastly superior. He wrote as follows to King Joseph: Chavignon, March 11th, 1814. My brother, I have examined the enemy's position. It was too strong to be attacked without incurring great loss. I have accordingly made up my mind to return to Soissons. It was probable that the enemy would have evacuated Laon for fear of being attacked there, but for the skirmish of the Duc de Ragusa, who behaved like a sub-lieutenant. The enemy experienced enormous losses when attacking the village of Classy 5 times yesterday and was always repulsed. The young guard melts away like snow. The old guard keeps firm. My mounted guards are also greatly diminished. It is indispensable that General Ornano should take every means to remount all the dragoons and chasseurs, beginning with the veterans. Orders must be given for redoubts to be constructed at Montmartre. And another letter from Napoleon. Soissons, March 13th, 1814. My brother, before beginning the works for the fortifications of Paris, the plan of these works must be known. The one which was presented to me seems very complicated. What one wants is something very simple. On every side of me, I receive complaints of the people against the mayors and leading citizens who prevent them from defending themselves. I see the same state of things in Paris. The people has energy and honor. I very much fear there are certain leaders who don't want to fight and who will be very much dazed after the event at what they have brought upon themselves. J. Another letter from Napoleon. March 14th, 1814. My brother, I arrived yesterday at Reims, which was occupied by the General-in-Chief, Saint Priest, with 3 Russian divisions and a new Prussian division, which came from the blockade of Stettin. I defeated him, recaptured the city, 20 pieces of cannon, a quantity of baggage and caissons, and made 5,000 prisoners. General Saint Priest was mortally wounded and has been amputated at the thigh. The thing to be noticed is that Saint Priest was wounded by the same gunner who killed General Moreau. One may exclaim, "Oh, Providence!" N. Another extract from a letter from the Emperor dated at Epernay, March 17th, 1814. I am expecting great results in my movement, which will throw great disorder and great confusion on the rear of my enemy and its headquarters, if it be still at Troyes. The couriers must be sent to me by Fert-sur-Jour, and thence to Arcy-sur-Aube by way of Epernay and Montmirail. You must tell the ministers of war and of police not to say anything which is not necessary, and to write anything of importance in cipher until my communications by way of Nogent have been established. Send officers to Soissons, to Compiègne, to Reims, and to Epernay, and have given orders for a division of 12,000 men, whom I am bringing from Metz to proceed to Chalon. I do not know whether this order will reach its destination. It would be a great piece of good fortune. And Another letter from Napoleon. Epernay, March 18th, 1814. My brother, the whole army is in movement to pass the night beyond Fair Champenoise, and thence to proceed in the direction of Arcis-sur-Aube and the enemy's bridges. I am in communication with our garrisons at Verdun and Metz. I am expecting a division of 12,000 men, whom I am withdrawing from these forts. It appears that the enemy has left Noyon, which clears the ground round Compiègne. The conduct of this commune was perfect. N. The success over General Saint Priest, the occupation of Rennes, Napoleon's presence in the city and in Epernay had surprised the Allies in the midst of their movement and had thrown them back into a state of indecision, which was revealed by a general retreat of their troops. The army of the enemy fell back upon Troyes, preceded by its baggage. Paris seemed threatened no longer. The Emperor Alexander sent word, it is stated, to Prince Schwarzenberg in the middle of the night, that he wished a courier to be sent off immediately to Châtillon, with orders to sign peace on the conditions asked for by the French negotiator. The Emperor of Austria had fled in the direction of Dijon, with a single officer and a valet de chambre to place himself in safety. Monsieur de Metternich succeeded in joining him there with some secretaries. They remained there without communications from the outside for a period of 30 hours. On the eve of evacuating Troyes to continue his retreat, the Emperor Alexander, recovering from his panic, convoked a council of war. At this council, he declared with emphasis that he was tired of fleeing before a handful of men with such formidable armies as were under his command, and that the only means of dictating peace was to march with all the forces of the coalition on Paris. Having countermanded the retreat, the concentration of the two great Allied armies was decided upon, and a meeting fixed in the plains of Chalons. The Allied forces looked for safety not only in the inertia of a part of the nation, which was being worked upon with magnificent promises, with the object of detaching it from Napoleon, but further in the prayers and encouragements of the royalist committees in Paris, whose communications with the Congress of Châtillon had remained permanent. Prince de Benevento, Talleyrand, bound by secret relations with influential persons in the foreign cabinets and courts, was in correspondence with the ministers present at the Congress, making ready to profit by events whatever they might be, and redoubling the activity of his intrigues both in Paris and abroad. Duke d'Alberg, whom the emperor had naturalized a Frenchman, but whose heart he had been unable to change, whom he had loaded with kindness, whom he had created a duke and endowed with 200,000 francs a year, the relation and friend of Nesselrode and Stadillon, the ministers, seconded by Prince de Benevento with all the zeal which his deep ingratitude could inspire him with. Every day at the council state where he had been placed in the section of home affairs to which I belonged, as there was no section of exterior relations, he used to bring us desperate tidings. His language was that of a man who was initiated in the plans of the Allied forces. Thus, when an immense array of hostile forces, seconded by the perfidy of foreign diplomacy, was rendering the glorious efforts of Napoleon and of his army of no avail, treachery at home was noiselessly consummated within the ruin of the imperial edifice. Simultaneously with their decision of uniting their forces and of marching in one body upon Paris, the Allies abandoned their empty show of negotiations. They declared that the Congress of Châtillon was closed, taking as a pretext that the French plenipotentiaries based themselves on certain apparent successes of the French army to go back on arrangements which they themselves had proposed. The representatives of the Allied powers alleged that there was no possibility of coming to an understanding and imputed the rupture of the negotiations to France. In vain did the Duc de Visson's Caulaincourt ask for 24 hours' grace in which to receive the instructions which he was expecting, instructions which were to authorize him to make what concessions were deemed possible and to discuss further concessions. The ministers of the coalition persisted in considering the negotiations as at an end. They withdrew, declaring the Congress dissolved on their own authority, in spite of all the protestations of the French plenipotentiaries at Châtillon as at Prague. Every way was blocked to freedom of discussion, and that in despite of diplomatic usages and the consideration with which civilized states treat each other, the courier who carried the dispatches from the emperor to his envoy to the Congress met the Duc de Vissons on the road on his way back to headquarters. The latter stopped to write to Metternich that he regretted the brusque breaking off of the negotiations, all the more because he had received certain dispatches which put him in a position to smooth over many difficulties. A final and useless step which only proved more clearly how great was our distress and how implacable the ill will of our enemies. Joseph Bonaparte had thought of the means of detaching the Prince Royal of Sweden, Bernadotte, from the coalition before the emperor had told him to attempt to do so. Joseph, Bernadotte's brother-in-law, as is known, retained the feeble hope that after having betrayed his country and having handed it over to the vengeance of the enemy, this erring son might, as he set foot upon his native soil, feel some remorse. He thought that the remembrance of their family alliance might contribute to arouse some generous feeling in the heart of an old French soldier who had risen to become a French marshal. King Joseph accordingly sent off Dr. Franzenberg to his brother-in-law by the agency of Schiap, a former conventionnel, a mutual friend of the two families, and he succeeded in reaching the Swedish headquarters. This step remained without result, Bernadotte alleging that it was too late. He had engaged himself still further with the coalition and had rendered them fresh services for which he expected his reward. It appears certain that he had been duped with the hope of succeeding the Emperor Napoleon on the throne of France. Monsieur de Langeron, an émigré in the command of a Russian army corps, declared that he transmitted to the Emperor of Russia intercepted letters which inspired the Allies with the fear of seeing Bernadotte lend his ear to overtures coming from Paris, a discovery which had induced the Emperor Alexander to lavish fresh promises and fresh flatteries upon Bernadotte. From that time forward, the fatal ambition of the ex-marshal of the empire knew no limits, rendering him deaf to the promptings of honor and of duty. The emperor had written to King Joseph from Troyes on February 25th as follows. It is said that the Prince Royal of Sweden is at Cologne. Could you not, on your own initiative, send somebody to him to make him feel the folly of his conduct and induce him to change it? Try it, but without involving me in any way. N. The following is a letter in which King Joseph informed the emperor of the step that had been taken in conformity with the wishes which his brother had expressed to him. Paris, March 13th, 1814. Sire, the person whom I sent to the Prince of Sweden returned today. He left the Prince at Liège on the 10th instant. If your Majesty wishes to examine him, you have but to give orders to the Prince of Neuchâtel, for whom I will give him a letter. If your Majesty should not desire to see him, he could give military information of some importance on the districts which he had just traveled through. The Prince of Sweden speaks frequently and quite openly of the return of the Bourbons. He is temporizing to give you time, as he says, to conclude peace, which he desires, as he wishes to return home. J. Letter from the Emperor to King Joseph. Rhymed. March 17th, 1814, noon. My brother, I have seen the officer attached to the Queen, whom you sent me. Amongst good things he tells me many, which are false. If you could trust him, I think it would be important to send him a second time and to send other messages. Would that not give us the advantage of learning what is going on in these provinces? Duke de Bassano, Marais, has written to Count Duterriva to hand you a copy of the declaration which was made by the allies at Châtillon, who wanted, being for, to treat for all the other powers. You may communicate this document in a confidential manner to the Prince Royal, pressing him to make efforts to have a minister at the Congress. For after all, Sweden can have no interest in allowing a quadriumvirate to put hands on the whole of Europe. It is for her, as has always been the case, to look after her affairs herself. Before sending this person, be sure that he is no traitor. And the emperor had many reasons for being suspicious, but King Joseph's envoy was a loyal man, a good Frenchman who had fulfilled his mission with zeal and fidelity. These communications had no further result and remained fruitless. The emperor excited the spirit of resistance in the hearts of the French against these hordes of barbarians, which the Allies vomited forth onto the center of civilization, and who committed atrocities surpassing all that can be imagined. He endeavored to keep men's courage alive by the display of trophies wrested from the enemy. On February 27th, the Minister of the Interior had presented the Empress with 10 Russian, Prussian, and Austrian flags taken at the battles of Montmirail and Vauchamp, and at the encounter at Montereau. These flags, carried by officers of the Imperial Guard and the National Guard, had been brought to Paris by Baron, today Duc de Montmartre, the emperor's orderly officer. The papers were filled with reports made by the auditors who had been commissioned to establish and put on record the cruelties and vexations committed by the Allies at every place which they had occupied, in spite of the presence of their sovereigns. The Paris Municipal Council received deputations from the towns in Champagne and Burgundy, who related the misfortunes which these provinces had had to suffer by the foreign occupation. But so great was the weariness with war that these reports did not produce the indignation which might have been expected. At the same time, Dupaty's rondos, with the choruses of "Let us guard her well," and "He has gone," were being sung in all the theaters. In spite of all, Paris was filled with alarm. The two letters following from the Empress describe the feelings which agitated the population of Paris sufficiently clearly. On February 12th, Marie-Louise wrote to me, "Good news. The Emperor has destroyed York's corps and has taken his material. The rest has got stuck in the crossroads. The Emperor was to sleep at La Ferté-sous-Jouarre and was in good health. This is what Monsieur Anatole reports to the Arch-Chancellor at 3:30. I hasten to acquaint you of it and beg you to believe in the sentiments of esteem of your very well affected Louise." On March 27th, she wrote to me, "I send you back the letter which you lent me this morning, and add to it 2 petitions which I beg you to send to the ministers, adding that I interest myself in them. It appears that our affairs are going so badly on the Duc de Raguse's side that we may very easily receive visitors here very shortly. What a terrible prospect! Louise."